hear the worshipers? Where's all of my praises? I want everybody around the world to put your hands together because all the praise belongs to God. Here we go.
Live from New York City, it's the Gary Null Show. And now, your host, Gary Null.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Null. We're here to empower people. We do it in different ways. This program is heard all over the world. And more often than not, most of the people tune in because they know that we're looking for the truth, not just facts. Facts can be very subjective. It's like a universal truth that empowers all of us equally. Individual truths, no, not so much. All of the information that I cite is always backed up by quality sources from peer-reviewed literature. And the reason I do that is because for so long the common argument against anyone talking about health was that, well, that's anecdotal, that's not good science. So for my entire career, I've only shared information from quality science. For example, today, we're going to take a look at menopause. A new study from the University of Nebraska published in the peer-reviewed journal Neurology and Rheumatology suggests that women with menopausal conditions, symptoms, are at a much higher risk of arthritis. And they suffer from a real big decline in physical function. And they studied 8,189 women with rheumatoid arthritis and found that the premenopausal women experienced a slower physical decline than those who were postmenopausal. Now, why is this important? Because we have tens of millions of women in the United States who are menopausal or postmenopausal. And this is particularly important for me because about 10 years ago, I did a clinical study. I've done over 40 clinical studies. And this is not a medical study. Mine are always lifestyle and behavior modifications, but they're monitored every single study by board-certified physicians. And because we want to make sure that the progress that people are making can be documented and verified. That's the whole point of the exercise. Because then we'll have a new truth that we can go and share with people in articles or broadcasts like this. The study took a year. To get into the study, you had to be postmenopausal for at least 2 years. Now, what are the symptoms you have when you're menopausal? Well, there's a variety, and not every woman experiences all of them, but it's mood swings, gaining weight though you're not overeating, having your skin texture change, losing a lot of that suppleness of the skin. Your hair begins to thin and fall out, the eyebrows as well. Your metabolism slows down. You're fatigued more often than not. Your body's more susceptible to immune compromise. You'll start finding fungus is affecting your fingernails and toenails. You end up with a drying of the vaginal tissue, so therefore normal intercourse is very painful. You also find a loss of libido. You just don't have the desire. You also can end up with pain in your joints and a slower movement. Now, those are just some of the symptoms, plus hot flashes occur even right up through menopause at the end, and night sweats. So what we were able to do, and this is why this is important, they're saying the phenomena exist, and I'm showing we can reverse it. How so? Well, for all of you suffering from any form of inflammation that could be diagnosed as arthritis, and if you're a woman and postmenopausal, here's some simple tips. It's not complicated. And to show you how important it is, the results showed a 92% improvement rate in symptoms of menopause. That's very difficult to get. For example, people who had trouble sleeping, which is also postmenopausal, now could sleep through the night, so overcoming sleeplessness and insomnia. Those who had urinary incontinence no longer had it. libido came back, hair began to grow. In fact, I remember on the last night at the last meeting, we filmed the introductory meeting, the first and the last. And many women got up and said, I used to dye my hair, but now I don't have to because my natural color is coming back and I'm 55 or 57 or 58. And it's stronger because as we age, hair frequently grows thinner. But now it's getting more lusterful and thick and voluminous. Eyebrows began to grow back where they had thinned. Fingernails and toenails were suddenly hard and shiny and healthy and pink instead of brittle and discolored and yellow. And also the quality of the skin on the face tightened up, natural collagen. So how did this happen? Here's the simplicity of it, plus overcoming the arthritis. I'd already done a separate arthritis protocol, and we had phenomenal results in another study. So I knew to help the women with different conditions, lowering blood pressure and lowering blood sugar. I'd done studies on those, and all these markers improved. And then we did a follow-up, a post-review a year later, and they continued to improve. First and foremost, eliminate pro-inflammatory beverages or foods. That would include coffee, which is very dangerous, and also fried foods, French fries, fried chicken, breads of any kind except Essene bread and Ezekiel bread, which is a sprouted bread, to give up all dairy in any form, and also to give up all animal proteins. The basic rule was if it has a heartbeat or a face, you don't eat it. Now all those, plus refined carbohydrates like bagels and toast and muffins and pretzels and potato chips, those all have a chemical called acrylamides, and the acrylamides are very, very destructive. They're very pro-inflammatory, and the meat has a chemical in the cooking of it, heterocyclic amines, and these are also very dangerous and carcinogenic. And the coffee is is very anabolic, and it's very acidifying. And it also can leach calcium out of the bones. It's a diuretic and therefore can take nutrients in your food and take them right through the system without them being digested. And it can cause dehydration. So a lot of people get their water from soft drinks that have caffeine and coffee that has caffeine. So there's always this dehydration. Now, you don't have to get dehydrated so much that it's clinical. It can be subclinical. And even a few percentage points below your ideal hydration level, let's say it's 72, 73%, if you're down around 68%, you're going to be more fatigued. Your skin will not look healthy. And you also have trouble with digestion, frequently constipation, because it takes a lot of water for food to properly be digested and to be evacuated out of the body. So by also then getting rid of all the things that causes inflammation, we're then able to rebuild the tissue with glucosamine sulfate and chondroitin sulfate. And lots of juices. The best juices are your green juices. Green apple, celery, and cucumber with chlorophyll. Also, I found one of the best things you can have is watermelon with the seeds, with lemon juice in it. A great thing for arthritis. And then all the nutrients, like black cumin seed oil. Little tough to take. I always recommend diluting it in a glass and drinking it in a protein shake. Some people can take it straight, but it's not pleasant. But that is just the best all-round detoxificant and rebalancer of your cells that you can take into your body. It's also strongly antibacterial. But it also is great for helping with your joints. And then cat's claw and cayenne were also good. And also coconut oil, olive oil, and the omega-3 fatty acids, all good. helping get that lubrication back in, and vitamin D3, vitamin C, and quercetin, coenzyme Q10, vitamin E at about 800 units of mixed tocopherols, and about a 50 milligram B complex. Now, there are other nutrients, but these are the ones that were primarily used. And exercising once a day for about 45 minutes, both aerobically and resistance, with some intensity in the exercise. So that's the part of the equation that this study that they just referred to, published in a major and respected peer-reviewed journal that all the rheumatologists get at a respected university, they're telling you a phenomena exists, and that's good. And I'm showing you with substantial scientific proof that it can be reversed. That they're clueless about. Oh, and by the way, the study was published, and then I was invited to make a presentation before about 6,000 scientists at an annual scientific conference in Washington, D.C. But not a word about it anywhere, as if this didn't exist. But it did, and it's there. Also, for those of you who want to have an enhanced memory, Waterford Institute of Technology reported new data on the carotenoids. Now, that's what you get if you have your vegetables like carrots, for example, and your green and yellow vegetables. It enhances memory in healthy individuals. So I want people to have a healthier immune system, so every one of these nutrients, the anathine and meso groups, all these are important for your brain. But also so is phosphatidylserine and acetyl-L-carnitine and inositol and choline. And also PQQ is very important. That is also good for memory. For all the people suffering from irritable bowel symptoms, there's a study from the University of Sheffield, which is in the United Kingdom. This is published in the respected European Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and it adds evidence to the beneficial effects of vitamin D against the unpleasant symptoms and diminished quality of life experienced with individuals with irritable bowel syndrome, which is a chronic, relapsing, functional bowel disorder whose cause is unknown. And the syndrome is characterized by bloating and abdominal pain and diarrhea and constipation. So stress and dietary factors will worsen it. So if you're on a standard American diet and you're stressed, it'll get worse. But vitamin D makes a major difference in improving irritable bowel syndrome. And so make sure that if you have irritable bowel, look at the scientific literature on vitamin D. Also, from university in Nigeria, they found that stress and diet are associated with blood bleeding in sub-Saharan Africa. And we have to understand just how many people are suffering from disease that could be prevented and certainly could be helped. But when you're looking in sub-Saharan Africa, you're looking at people who frequently are environmental migrants, mainly from drought, so they cannot grow enough food to sustain quality of life and full health. Even individuals who've lived near Lake Chad and some of the other major lakes in Africa, those lakes are drying up. They've been overfished. And drought has diminished the contribution of water flow into these systems. And those who live in the plain areas, the soil's getting so hot now in the last 5 years that when they do get a seed and they put it in the ground, the seed frequently won't germinate because it's too hot. That's also happening, by the way, but to a lesser extent in the United States in the breadbasket. It doesn't take a high temperature, real high temperature. It's the time of the year when the seeds are planted, what the normal ground would be, and then what it becomes. If it's just 3 to 5 degrees higher than normal, it can stunt the seeds. In any case, here is a suggestion. You never see these individuals. We never hear their stories. Maybe if there's some cataclysmic event, some major disaster, for a day, it'll be in the newspapers, but otherwise it's out of conscious, out of mind. Why don't we just assume that about 160 million people living in Africa need our help? And the way you help people is not just by sending over some food, and the food that we send over is not really good food. It's processed flour that is pretty much deficiently devoid. It'll give you some amino acids, but not a whole lot, and processed corn. What would really help the people in Africa who are stressed is to first go in and set up wells. And you can dig deep wells. The technology exists, meaning 200, 300, 400 feet. And that way you can hit into some of those low-lying aquifers. And the science of doing topography, infrared exams can show you where these aquifers are. So you're not just digging holes randomly and blindly in the desert. And then to build greenhouses, hydroponic houses, where the wells are. So you now have a sustainable 12 months a year growing cycle that is not impacted by the extremes of weather, and you have water. You then can build latrines so that people have a way of washing, bathing, and drinking water that's clean. And ask any of the doctors in Africa, what is one of the most common diseases? Schistosomiasis. It's a larva that is infesting waters, and principally still waters, but it can be in running waters as well. So if you don't have clean water, you really put yourself at risk. So if you have clean water, that's a big plus. Now, that's not expensive to do. You're probably looking in the neighborhood of around $50,000 for a nice greenhouse that would grow food for about at least 100 to 200 people and well water. Because where are these people supposed to go? How are they supposed to get there? They have no money. They're going to be on foot. And think of the problems now with people going to Libya from other parts of Africa, hoping to get to Greece or one of the countries where they can find asylum. And they're now taken prisoner in Libya in the largest open market slave trading in the world. It's estimated that more than 1 million Africans, more or less at this moment, have been kidnapped, abused, or engaged in forced labor. And I've posted photographs of how they're tied up. My goodness, this is horrific. And yet the world says nothing, and not a word by Obama or the Clintons, who have the money and the resources and the political capacity to cause this charitable work to be done. So we're misapplying much of the charity. Instead of looking sustainability, we're looking at temporary. And you just have too many people and too few donors. We need something that is more lasting. That's the latest on health and nutrition. And one last thing, by the way, from the University of Beirut in Lebanon, pomegranate juice prevents the formation of lung nodules secondary to cigarette smoking. So we all know someone. In my case, everyone in my family smoked. I was the only one who never did. I can only imagine the impact that had secondhand smoke when you have everyone in a house smoking 3 to 4 packs a day. In any case, you can end up with, the smoker ends up with this severe oxidative stress leading to DNA damage. And but pomegranate juice possesses potent antioxidant activity and is rich in polyphenols, which the researchers found really help the lungs of smokers. So let's get everyone we know, even if they don't want to stop smoking, get them taking vitamin C and pomegranate juice each day. That can make a difference. That can actually prevent lung cancer or save a life. That's the latest on health and healing. We're going to take a brief break and come right back. Please stay with us. Nice to have you with us, everyone. Just a reminder, we have a major effort worldwide challenging the safety and efficacy of vaccines. That is not to suggest that I tell people not to vaccinate. I do not. I believe in freedom of choice. My goal is to put enough pressure upon the federal agencies, the CDC, the FDA, the U.S. Public Health Service, so that we can get rid of these scientists for hire who are part of the vaccine industry, sitting on the boards of the FDA and CDC that pass on the scheduling of vaccines. We need independent scientists, immunologists and toxicologists who have no connection with the vaccine industry, who look carefully at the studies and say, do these really show immunity? And if so, what type of immunity? And for how long is that immunity? And if not, then not just to pass on another vaccine that ends up making billions of dollars of profit but doesn't help anyone and with side effects can be harmful. So that's the goal. The film that highlights all of this, that documents it, and the corruption in the field, is called Deadly Deception. It is there as a public service. It's free. If you go to prn.fm, that's PRN as in Nancy, PRN.fm, you can download the film. You can also see a very important original, in-depth investigative reporting article, fully footnoted, fully referenced, on, it's entitled, The CDC Vaccines in the Deep State. It shows you who's behind all of this, and it documents it. So it's important. Educate yourself and then share it as far and wide as you can. I'm involved in a major investigation now, the most important investigation. I've done some important ones. I've done over 300, but this is a dilly. And my hope is to have all the work done by May. So I will then make the presentations at that time. I can't tell you more than that. But I came up with an idea yesterday, and for some of you in the audience, this may resonate. What we need is a lot of people working together as citizen journalists, activists. It's one thing when someone does something and starts a movement, you show up for it. That's good. Or if you hear that there's a call to action, you got to make a phone call to a legislator, whoever it might be. That's good. But that generally doesn't happen unless there's an awful lot of preparatory work to actually create something that proves something. Meaning you have to show that something's being done incorrectly or illegally or immorally in order for people to be inspired to take up the gauntlet and say yes and sustain it. Because movements in and of themselves won't change anything. Society now is hardwired to tolerate a march or a letter-writing campaign or denouncements. If their only motive is profit, they know that sooner or later people will stop showing up and it's business as usual. From my perspective, the importance of a movement is to cause the change at the fundamental level and bring power back to the people who are responsible. And that's why I'm suggesting that as of today, if you are a good reader, if you like to read and you're patient and you can understand the nuances of what you're reading, if you're reading a study and you suddenly see that the title of the study is not supported by the body of the study. This happens all the time. Oh, that study didn't prove anything. Hold on. It did. They manipulate studies all the time because whoever pays for the study hires the scientists who review it and write it up. I've taught a course in research methodology. I don't do it now, but I used to. And showing how to know if the study is accurate or not, legitimate or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest that there's one particular topic that I won't discuss on air that needs to be researched, and we need to come up with a lot of information, raw data. From that raw data, from doing a lot of reading, including some books, including articles. From that, we can then put together some investigative reports and make these citizen journalists white papers, and then give these to groups, give these to different groups that exist now with new and fresh information that they're not aware of, they do not have at their disposal. You might assume that every time there's a demonstration, there's a guest speaker, that the people are completely informed, very aware. That's not true. Absolutely not true. So if you're a person that would like from your home to spend a couple hours a week doing some reading on important topics that would later be used as part of some citizen reports, call or just send background on yourself to prnstudio@gmail.com, and we'll have someone from my office get back to you. Because one particular very important topic that's not getting the attention it needs and should would probably require about 10 people working about a month, about 5 hours a week, to get all the basic information. And that information, once it's then taken and put into proper articles, could then be sent to legislators at the state and the federal level and to the media, with press conferences held around the United States to draw attention to this, and also give that data to celebrities, because then those activist celebrities, who I've mentioned in the past and I have a lot of respect for, they would have real deep information. Remember, the deeper the information you have, the greater the scholarship of the information you have, the more facts and legitimate supporting documentation you have, the more likely it is to be taken seriously. And then even getting federal investigations opened up. In effect, we're going to do the background research for a state or federal investigative agency. It'll all be laid out for them. Now, I can't do all this myself because of the huge investigation I'm doing on this other project, and I'm doing that alone because I cannot allow anyone, an agent provocateur, saboteur, or anyone to get wind of what I'm doing, because it's devastating. I mean, it's really powerful, as you'll see when I finally break this story. And they won't know what I'm doing, where it's going, until the day that I break it. That's that. Now, I want to play some audio clips for you, and then I'll open up the lines for some talk back. But I want you to hear these first. And the first one is about China. You think, why China? What do I care about China for? Because everything that we're doing with our budget, the vast majority of expenses are from the military-industrial complex. There are several 100,000 private and public contractors who have found a way to bleed the American public with worthless and dangerous projects, and frequently now to be used against Americans themselves. And we think that's a good thing. And it's not. The world does not need more arms, more weapons. It does not need more conflict. At the same time that we're doing that, as is Great Britain and France, along comes China, and it's investing trillions of dollars into building a whole industrial revolution from China clear through Africa, the Middle East, and up through Europe. So they're making allies, and they're actually giving countries billions of dollars to build roads and new manufacturing facilities. And it's helping China, but it's also helping these countries. If you go into a poor country and you give them $50 to $100 billion and become their partner in making new highways to connect point A to point B, or a new port, and factories employing people, putting people to work, not on arms, on making computers and other things, clothes, and increasing the standard of living and increasing the wages for people, And increasing education is part of that. You're building schools so that the people can have more of their own persons living in their country be educated. That's a smart move on the side of China. Now, China has a lot I'm absolutely opposed to, including its communist hierarchy, its lack of humanistic values. I'm talking about the government, not the Chinese people. But look what it's done. Now, at the same time that it's doing all that, what do we know about Russia? We just know that Vladimir Putin is the modern Hitler and should be destroyed, and we have sanctions against Russia. But what beyond that do we know? Does Russia actually represent an existential threat to the United States or anyone else? And if you ask the average person, what's life like in Russia? How is their standard of living? Knowing full well that they have been, inundated with all these problems from the sanctions, plus the drop in the price of oil, which is a big part of their how they make their money. What if I told you the following? What if I told you that when Vladimir Putin first came into power as Russian president in 2000, the quality of life was abysmal. The average Russian took home around $9,800 a year. That was their purchasing power parity, or what's called the PPP. Today, $27,900. In fact, Russia, according to RT, has the highest gross domestic product per capita among its fellow BRIC countries, with the next highest, China, having 16,000. You never hear this, do you? So that means that you have increased the quality of life and given them a higher standard of living, and you've reduced inflation tremendously. So the average nominal monthly wage has grown by 1,100%. Imagine if that was the United States. Ours hasn't grown barely at all. And it went from $61 to $650 a month. Unemployment was 13%. Now it's 5%. Pensions have grown over 1,000%, from $20 a month to $221 a month. And Russia is now the sixth largest economy in the world, with a $4 trillion gross domestic product. But also, Russia has reduced inflation from 36% to 2%. And it doesn't have the debt. Russia's debt in 2000, Russia just had $12 billion in reserves. Their debt was 92%, meaning for every dollar they had, they owed $92 or 92 cents. And yet, in that 18 years, they've reduced their debt to now just from 92% to 17% of gross domestic product. So, in a real sense, Russia, under Putin, is much better at controlling debt and how they spend their money. And they don't go spending it all on military-industrial complex, as we do. And also, they're smart. They have 1,838 tons of gold. We don't have any. And they're right with China at that. And they can back up the ruble with gold. We have nothing backing up our currency. Oh, and by the way, they're the world's largest producer of organic produce now. They banned genetic engineering. In fact, they outproduced the United States by a major margin when it came to grains. Russian farmers produced their largest crop this past year, and at 130 million tons. They had so much wheat, for example, and that's organic wheat, that they had the largest amount that they were able to sell. They sold 45 million tons. That's an increase of 600%. So on the one hand, other countries, with all their faults, with all their limitations, are doing things with their agriculture, with domestic growth, with infrastructure, and we're doing none of it. Not a single thing. Industrial farming, great dust bowls, sandstorms, depletion of our aquifers, genetic modified foods, garbage diet, sickness index. Other countries are getting healthier, we're getting sicker. They have universal health care, we don't. We have a privatized system. So doesn't it make common sense that we spend a little time learning about other countries and what they're doing just to become aware of it? Doesn't mean you have to like the country or the politicians, their system, but at least be aware of what we're not doing and what others are and how this is going to make us very possibly in part a third world nation. We'll be a first world nation for the richest of us, and we'll be a third world nation for the poorest of us. And I predict this. I've told you about the green zones where if you've got money and power, you'll be protected, have quality of life in the United States, unless you're in one of the environmental danger zones. But outside of that, everyone else will have to have an identity chip to get in, and the new identity chips are no longer chips. Let me tell you something that's going on now. The technology is now, not the future. Not the future. No, they're not going to make a little tiny pinch between your forefinger and your thumb and insert a little tiny little vessel. No, you're going to drink a liquid, and in that liquid will have millions of tiny little particles. You won't see them. You won't even know they're in you. They can track you anywhere, and they can monitor everything about you. And we don't know all the reasons why it's in your body, except they do. And this is the deep state. Do you trust them? I don't. So no matter where you went, they would know where you're at. And they would know everything about you. They would know your heart rate. They would know your blood sugar. Now, could they do something more nefarious? Don't know. I'm trying to find out. But that's where we're all today. And people are not paying attention, thinking, oh, great, robotics. Yeah, let's get us a big sex toy. They're promoting this idea now that the women can select the men that will look just like the most handsome man, or whatever particularly attracts a woman. They'll be able to go online and get that man. And a woman, same way. A man can get any of these, no longer a blow-up doll or something that looks like it came out of a Japanese, irky-jerky plant, but something that really looks and sounds and speaks to you like a human being. Do you have any idea the downside of all this? Of virtual reality games, the downside. We're not even aware of the downside of the internet today and social media and the fact that a whole generation of snowflakes who couldn't survive 5 seconds on their own, with few exceptions, have been conditioned to believe that their depression and their anxiety and their detachment from real people is normal and acceptable. It isn't. So listen now to the new Silk Road in China. I think you'll find it informative.
Completed both the world's most extensive system of expressways and the planet's longest high-speed rail network, China is now looking beyond its borders for opportunities to keep building. President Xi Jinping announced at a recent summit that Beijing has sealed megaproject deals with 65 countries throughout Eurasia and Africa to construct ports, power stations, rail lines, roads, and all the tunnels and bridges needed to connect them back to mainland China. At a total cost of over $1 trillion, the One Belt, One Road initiative is unprecedented in size and scope. So is the bold funding mechanism. China will use its large, state-run banks to provide most of the financing. A risky move when you consider how few of the nations in the OBOR could afford something like this on their own. Oh, say the leaders of economically challenged underdeveloped Laos, Yemen, or Ethiopia, or the blood-soaked regime of Bashar al-Assad in war-ravaged Syria. You want to loan us billions of dollars to build some cool stuff in our countries? Of course, why not? China is hard selling the project as a way to boost its westward connections, an update of the Silk Road trade route that played a significant role in developing China and the rest of the region 1,000 years ago. But many analysts see this comparison as little more than a marketing pitch.
Charles, is the real point of this East Wind service then simply to boost China's westwards connections?
Well, I wouldn't say simply to boost China's westward connections, but I totally agree with Charles that it's a PR stunt to call it the Silk Road, that's really brilliant, evocative of romantic camel travels in the past, when you have these lovely silks and trade and so forth. And it's good because look at all the headlines it has been getting. But in practical terms, it's early days yet.
Aside from the lessons China learned from its own recent infrastructure boom, Beijing is also drawing inspiration from the American Marshall Plan, which financed the rebuilding of Western Europe after it was decimated during the Second World War. That program was worth the equivalent of $130 billion in today's dollars and ensured the US had reliable export markets for the manufactured goods and machinery its growing economy had become dependent on producing. China's modern version, first announced in 2013, is the signature initiative of President Xi Jinping. Several projects have already been completed. Earlier this year, London became the 15th European city connected directly to China through an ever-expanding global rail system, meaning freight trains loaded with goods can now arrive after a 12,000-kilometer journey all the way from the east coast of the landmass. And at a cost of $4 billion, China also just completed Africa's first transnational electric railway, which runs 466 miles from Djibouti to Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. Chinese companies designed the system, built the line, and supplied the train cars. The many other projects under the OBOR umbrella include a $6 billion 260-mile railway connecting 8 Asian countries, desperately needed power plants to address Pakistan's chronic electricity shortage, part of a larger $46 billion investment by China in Pakistan aimed at offsetting the American and Japanese-backed building boom happening in neighboring India, China and Pakistan's mutual rival. Train lines will connect Budapest and Belgrade, Serbia, providing another artery for Chinese goods to reach Europe after arriving in a Chinese-owned port in Greece. And, in a move that adds prestige to OBOR, China is financing more than a third of the $23.7 billion cost of the Hinkley Point C nuclear power plant in southwest England. Part of the challenge in analyzing whether this building boom is ultimately good for the world is its sheer complexity. Nothing like this has ever been done before in human history. Yes, providing underdeveloped countries a chance to have better transportation infrastructure or cleaner power plants is a good thing. But by funding infrastructure that's designed to enhance commerce and trade, instead of basic services many of these countries need more, like clean drinking water, affordable housing, and better education, China's motives seem to favor the wealthy, elite business class. Here are some other major factors that explain why China is undertaking a project of this magnitude. The Communist Party has staked its reputation on non-stop economic growth. Since they hold all the power, the Chinese people expect them to deliver. But with its domestic megaproject boom nearing completion, China must find new buyers for all the steel, cement, and construction machinery its economy produces, or many of its factories could grind to a halt. It is decided the solution is One Belt, One Road, but lending hundreds of billions of dollars to many countries with weak credit ratings and unstable political systems is very risky, which reveals an underlying sense you get when you look closely at One Belt, One Road, China's increasing desperation. The country's national debt is already very high, but borrowing continues to accelerate at historic levels as state-owned banks loan more and more money to state-owned companies. The prime example of the risks associated with the tightrope the Communist Party is trying to walk was the government's bailout issued during China's recent stock market collapse. That crisis was caused by the same sense of impatience that's driving OBOR, the party's need to feed the insatiable economic growth monster. Using its powerful propaganda machine, Beijing urged its own people to invest their savings heavily in its immature, unstable market, causing inexperienced citizens to treat investments in companies like bets at a casino, creating a huge bubble that, naturally, burst. The government then suspended trading for a while and pumped billions into the system to avoid a total collapse. So really, when you step back, the core motivation for One Belt, One Road boils down to the Communist Party's need to buy itself more time in order to come up with its next scheme to prop up the economy. Because when it inevitably slows down, which it's already starting to do, the party's promise to deliver a fantastic economic dream world will have been proven false for everyone in China but the elites. The silver lining is that many of the ventures China has undertaken will pay long-term dividends, like building up its high-tech manufacturing center, with the anticipation that when OBOR's transportation networks are complete, it will be ready to use them to deliver higher-cost goods like iPhones, drones, and green energy technologies to the rest of the world. The other major motivating factor here is the unmistakable opportunity to gain even power status with the United States in Asia. The election of Donald Trump and then his decision to walk away from the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal that would have hurt China are massive geopolitical mistakes, completely unforced errors that China intends to take full advantage of. When it first announced the OBOR back in 2013, Barack Obama had just begun his second term, and the US pivot to Asia was in full force. With rivals like Japan, South Korea, and Vietnam challenging China's efforts to control maritime trade routes, it was clear China was being hemmed in on its eastern flank. Despite the election of Trump, this is still true. So by instead turning to the vast land mass to the west for new opportunities, China minimizes its reliance on maritime trade routes that could be cut off in the event of a destabilizing military conflict. At the end of the day, China is all about that business. It doesn't matter if you're a democracy, a dictatorship, or a failed state. China wants to work with you. But this willingness to embrace some of the world's more unsavory characters could backfire. Just look at who Xi is sitting next to at the OBOR summit. Russia's Vladimir Putin and Turkey's Erdogan. Two men who look more and more like dictators clinging to power with each passing day. That's not a good look for China. And it reminds us that the Communist Party is even less transparent. But in a world where the President of the United States is a bumbling fool, these partnerships create much less of an image problem now than they would have just a few months ago when the widely admired Barack Obama was leading the free world. If you ask the Chinese, the OBOR is all about peace, an embrace of the concept of co-opetition. A generation ago, it was unthinkable for a country to invest billions of dollars on infrastructure in another country. But in our hyper-globalized world, dominated by interconnected markets, it may become the norm, especially when we consider the intangible benefits. Greater economic interdependence lowers the risk that groups of countries will want to fight with other groups of countries, many of whom are bound together by military alliances. Every one of these projects increases China's soft power, giving Beijing more and more leverage in any future negotiation or military conflict. The many foreign seaports it will build and manage for the next half-century will be particularly valuable chess pieces.
So look where they're putting their money and their political influence. Look at the partnerships they're aligning with, and then look what we're doing. We go into a country, it's to occupy it or to take out its resources. And this just doesn't seem to be on anyone's mind. And this is going on full throttle. So, something to think about. I'm not where I can take calls today, but I will do this. I want to finish off the program today with what's happening with journalists who tell the truth. Good journalists. We're going to play a clip now of punishing reporters with Abby Martin. I think you'll find it important. Please listen.
After seeing the events unfold in Crimea, I came into work last week knowing that it might be my last day because I felt morally obligated to speak out against the editorial line of my employer. When I broke that set, the call was heard around the world by every mainstream media outlet imaginable, which picked up on the fact that a journalist working on a Russian-backed TV station was admonishing Russia, the focal point of indignant fervor around the world. But I wasn't simply calling out Russia. I was calling out the U.S. as well as every other global superpower that pits the people of other countries against each other as pawns to push a broader agenda of imperialism. Despite what the onslaught of hit pieces and the wicked insanity said, I'm not anti-West or anti-Russia. I am pro-peace and pro-diplomacy. But above all, I have ethical consistency of an anti-military track record as well as a strong moral compass of empathy, compassion, and the rule of law. RT is funded by public grants in Russia in the same way that Al Jazeera is in BBC in Britain and Qatar. Yet every newscast I heard was prefaced with the reminder that RT is Kremlin-funded, or it was introduced with the declaration that RT is widely considered a 24-hour propaganda network. Above all, I still have my job, which I think shocked people more than ever. You see, the fact that I might have more editorial freedom or leniency within the ranks than the majority of corporate-funded news outlets doesn't sit too well. But let me ask you this. When was the last time you saw the National Defense Authorization Act covered on corporate TV? or Nestle's privatization of water around the earth, or Monsanto's stronghold on food labeling in this country? Or what about the plight of the Oglala Sioux Native Americans at Pine Ridge? And when it comes to cheerleading America's wars, well, don't even get me started. See, 6 corporate giant conglomerates control nearly 90% of all media Americans consume. And let's be honest, the paradigm pushed by these outlets fits into a box that marginalizes radical thought and third-party voices. And there are far too many instances of establishment reporters either getting fired or resigning for speaking out against the editorial line of their network, or for simply going against their advertisers. Like in 1999, when 2 Fox reporters named Jane Aker and Steve Wilson attempted to air a story about the dangers of genetically modified bovine growth hormone. And they were subsequently blocked from airing the report because of threats from Monsanto. And then there's NBC's Peter Arnett, who was immediately fired for making critical commentary about the Iraq War on Iraqi television. A memo from management made it very clear the reason was because he, quote, put a difficult face on the public for NBC in a time of war. Moving on to MSNBC's Phil Donahue, a news host who had a 29-year run on national TV. He was also fired because of his open criticism of the Iraq invasion. As Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Chris Hedges so aptly said, that moment was a time that commercial television decided amassing corporate money and providing entertainment was its central mission. And then there's a woman named Andrea Seabrook, a former NPR reporter on the Hill who resigned in protest of impartiality. She came on Breaking the Set to tell me how fed up she was with essentially reprinting government press releases. She actually called the incestuous relationship between reporters and politicians on the Hill collusion. And most recently, there's CBS News investigator Cheryl Atkinson, who resigned out of her contract early, citing that she was frustrated with the network's bias and pressure from its corporate partners. After the dissent at RT became viral, a former writer for the Democratic website Think Progress also wrote an article saying that he felt suffocating pressure reporting in D.C. and that his network would get berated with phone calls from the White House if he criticized the administration. This type of self-censorship is nothing new. It comes with the territory of working for any large media outlet funded by questionable entities. Except the difference with corporate media is that there are literally hundreds of conflicts of interest fueling their editorial lines. So we're here to go over a topic of censorship and truth in media. I'm joined now by investigative journalist and former CNN reporter Amber Lyon. Amazing to have you on, Amber.
Thank you, Abby, so much for having me. It's an honor.
So, Amber, you famously left CNN after working there for years, citing reasons of censorship. Can you talk about what happened with your documentary that you filmed in Bahrain for the network?
Yeah, we produced this documentary exposing that this Bahrain regime, the regime the United States had been supporting financially and with weapons, that this same regime was actually even using some of those weapons to torture and murder its people. And after we produced this documentary, we were told by CNN International that the documentary wasn't going to air. And we were given almost no explanation, Abby, as to why they chose not to air this documentary. And after further investigation, we found out that Bahrain was a paying customer at the network at CNN, that Bahrain and several other pro-United States regimes worldwide are actually paying CNN to produce positive content and fake documentaries about them, which I consider to be infomercials for dictators. And I think that CNN sprinkles this into their programming with little or no disclosure to viewers and their own journalists. And it's really defrauding viewers and really misleading people, Abby.
That is fascinating, Amber. And what I find most interesting is that every time I talk about self-censorship to people like Piers Morgan or Bob Garfield on NPR, they are all shocked. They're like, what are you talking about? We never self-censor. I mean, do you think that this is a big issue in the press today?
It's a tremendously big issue, Abby. A lot of the muckraking journalists have actually had to leave the mainstream, including myself, because we just can't do our jobs on these networks because there is so much censorship. In 10 years of working in the mainstream, I was censored on stories at every single one of my jobs, whether that be to please corporate interests or the story was censored to please the United States government. So this is a chronic problem that's really destroying journalism in the United States, and people really need to understand when you're watching the mainstream media, you're not getting the accurate picture. A lot of the journalists have been turned into lapdogs versus watchdogs because that's what management wants.
Right. I mean, I was just mentioning 2 reporters that have basically said that they resigned because they were sick of reprinting government press releases. I mean, this is the way it works on the Hill here, Amber. I mean, as someone who's worked in the establishment media for so long, how would you say the editorial process works when people pitch stories they want to cover? I mean, do most journalists have that editorial freedom?
No, they don't. And I didn't have that when I was at CNN. And you're talking about that close, cozy relationship between Washington reporters and the U.S. government. While I was at CNN, I'd actually have other journalists at CNN write me and call me and ask me to amend my stories in favor of the U.S. government or government entities. They would call me on behalf of the U.S. government to change my stories, which I often refuse to do. But I mean, that's just the nature of what's going on there. A lot of these journalists have cozy relationships with authorities that are very questionable.
Well, there you have it. More on this on an upcoming program where we're inviting Abby Martin on to talk about how pervasive that censorship is. I want to thank you all for listening, and I look forward to sharing more tomorrow. And tonight's show on Progressive Commentary Hour is going to be a really powerful and in-depth one. I'm having out Professor Alexander Kvich, a professor of Islamic studies, and we're going to really probe the entire difference between, let's say, Islam, the universalism, and nonviolence among Sufis and other sects versus the Wahhabism, where the violence comes from, and by one of the world's leading authorities on the subject. That's at 7 o'clock on Progressive Radio Network. Thank you all for listening, and have a nice day.